everyone, and welcome back to ABH Podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health. I am your host, Danielle Young, and we are wrapping up our series on COVID and the education system. What happened? Wendy, we have made it to an end of another series. How are you doing?
Hey, Danielle, I'm doing great. I'm so proud of us that we have done another series this summer. Such a good series, too, as school is going back into session. And today, I'm very excited. You know, you and I have talked endlessly about, wouldn't it be great to have a young person come on our podcast and talk about COVID and education and what it was like to be quarantined. And I'm so proud today. Our special guest, remember I told you we had a special guest coming. I wouldn't tell you who it was.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to introduce to our audience my daughter, Madison Grier.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here.
Welcome, Madison. Welcome. It's so nice to meet you.
You too. I'm Madison Grier. I'm a sophomore at Temple University, and I graduated during pandemic, class of 2020, and it was a very hard, very hard time.
I can only imagine.
Actually spent, graduated in the pandemic from high school and started your freshman year at Temple during a pandemic. You were only able to take maybe 3 weeks there, and then we had to come get you and bring you home because of COVID. Yep. So it has been interesting, and that's one of the reasons why we're very excited to have you on our show. We wanted to get a perspective from a young person who went from high school to college and what that was like. So there are a lot of challenges you faced, I'm sure. Why don't you describe to our audience your experience?
Okay, so at that time, I was really focused on applying to college and working with guidance counselors, making sure all of my paperwork was submitted on time, making sure schools got everything, making sure my grades were still being maintained that I had while going to school in person. That was really the hardest part because my guidance counselors were not really communicating with me as well. Or like I would send an email and then I would get an email back 2 weeks later, almost missing deadlines, and schools were hounding me, almost facing getting waitlisted just because they weren't keeping up with what I asked them to do. Had to report a guidance counselor to the guidance counselor department head. It was very, very traumatic, and I don't want to go through that again. I'm glad that I'm finally getting to go back in person. I really personally didn't have the biggest struggle with distance learning and virtual learning. I don't know if it's because I was taking AP classes and a lot of our stuff was independent already, and I had a half schedule, so instead of having 8 classes, I only had 6, and on a certain day I get to go home early and just had the rest of the day to chill. But a lot of my peers had more of a struggle with transitioning from in-person to online learning.
And Madison, with all that said, how was it going into your first year at Temple?
It was very iffy. It was a lot different than high school because I was going to a fresh environment and didn't really know anybody. The only way I was getting to communicate with members of my class was through Facebook comments. Just people doing general introductions about themselves, telling about where they're from, where they're studying, what college they're a part of, and they're trying to figure out who's staying where, because that was also a problem. People were having a hard time finding housing since you couldn't really go and really see it, or they were trying to make sure they weren't wasting their money and stuff. So college was very, very different than high school when it comes to transitioning from in-person to virtual.
And I can imagine because all of your classes were online, right?
Yes, when I had registered for my classes, exactly a year ago, and did my freshman orientation, I had my seminar class, which is basically the class that talked about the biology pathway and what classes I would need to take in order to get my degree on time. That was the only class I had in person at that time, and that was basically the class that introduced me to some of the people that were also studying a science major, or STEM major, I should say. And after going to one class that was in person, literally, I want to say a week later, get an email from my professor saying that the school has mandated all classes to be online.
So I can imagine that was really hard. I actually
It
watched
was
you go
very
through
hard.
that.
It was very hard.
Do you have any feelings about missing some of the norms that students get to partake in, such as when you're in high school, graduation, prom, when you're a freshman in college, it's all the freshman activities. Did you miss that kind of stuff?
I did somewhat miss that kind of stuff. Like, I was never the person to be really hyped about going to homecoming, prom, any like school events. I personally wasn't a big fan of my school and their spirit, but I wish I got the time, like, I got to experience it just because it's prom, it's graduation. Like, I graduated early and I wanted to see myself walk across the stage. And, like, a lot of people thought I was graduating early for the wrong reasons. And I was like, no, like, I actually want to get a head start on my career becoming a doctor. And it has nothing to do with, like, any, like, extrinsic properties that have to do with, like, social life. Like, I knew exactly what I wanted to do and I did it.
Wow. So yes, we're very proud that you did accomplish that goal.
You know, Madison, I'm trying to get a word in here, and this is really good to see you and your mom having this conversation. And also for our audience who may happen to be teenagers, who may happen to be seniors in high school, or who may happen to be freshmen in college, or they're having to approach a new way of thinking when it comes to education, a new way of moving, a new way of adjusting when it comes to education. And I can say that as a therapist, I also have clients who experience much of the same thing that you experience with having to really adjust and having a unique perspective of being a student who now has to do things online, where maybe at first you might have wanted to do things online, or maybe virtually was like the way to go.
I definitely did.
But then it becomes difficult because, as you were saying, you know, there were challenges with getting things in on time, not necessarily on your end, but on the education school side. And then also you kind of touched on college being a new experience in general. College is a new experience anyway, and you're graduating early, and, you know, you're now in this pandemic. Now COVID is here. And you're wondering, am I going to get on campus? Who are my roommates? How do I communicate? I don't have my college email. I have to go by way of Facebook or other social media. I don't know if you also use Instagram, but that's really interesting. And, you know, trying to figure out where you were going to live. And as I said before, as a therapist, I actually do have clients that have experienced the same thing. And so, you know, thinking about our next question for you, we are mental health professionals, your mother and I, Miss Wendy and I. And, you know, we wanted to sound the alarm a long time ago when it became an issue that we began to see with our clients about social distancing and how it actually impacted our young people's mental health, some children and teenagers and young adults. And we also found that data actually shows that we begin to see an increase, and I know that I could speak for that myself with clients, an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression, even an increase in some mood disorders. I wanted to know really, you know, what were your thoughts, and maybe possibly from a perspective of a high schooler and or college student. Did you happen to see that, or where do you think maybe the system went wrong in calculating, or maybe not wrong, but where do you think the challenge was in calculating what were the steps for students from a young person's perspective? Do you think there were any miscalculations there? Because not everyone likes school, or they have a different method of learning, or, you know, their comprehension level is a little different. What are your thoughts?
It's basically what you just said. Like, for me, I saw that the school completely ignored not everybody liking school. They have to really analyze that. And me personally, I learn more kinesthetically. Like, I'm more hands-on. Like, that's how I learn. Learning math through Zoom and Google Meets was not it. Yeah, not everybody liking school, and different learning methods really played a part. I know for me, it was, I have to get a routine. Like, how I learn is just like, end all be all, I have to get a routine. So I would just wake up, see what I had to do. Literally, I would be on YouTube. I never really used any of the resources that provided me because personally, they just did not help. It was just visual, somebody else that was teaching the class. And it sucked because some of my teachers were tired right before the pandemic had started. So I had substitutes coming in and out, and they didn't even know what was going on. So for weeks and weeks, I wasn't getting any work, and I was stuck. And then one week, I had a whole bunch of work that just was never spoken about, and it was very frustrating. So, and then I also believe that the school system so, you know, people my age like to go online. That's their way of, like, I don't know, like relieving stress, coping with certain things. They thought, okay, you know, young adults, teenagers, preteens, etc., they like to go online, play video games, so all that. So let's incorporate that into online learning. And they completely disregarded that. So then that equals assigning more work. I believe that we got more work that we actually got when we were in person, not really explaining the work well. Also, getting frustrated when students would turn in assignments late. And I thought that was very ironic, because it was like, we're at home, we're adjusting to a new environment of learning. Parents are sitting here trying to homeschool people. They have no teaching experience, etc. And you shouldn't really be getting frustrated. Like with a student who's having a hard time, good students that get good grades still were getting fussed at for turning in stuff late, and I really just didn't understand that.
You know, I'm hearing you talk, and I honestly can really appreciate your candor, your candidness. And I think that what you're speaking of is something that I've definitely heard with some of my teenagers and some of my college students as well. It is refreshing to hear, but I also want our listeners to hear from a young person who has experienced this and who is open and willing to have this discussion about the challenges and having the foresight, or at least getting some knowledge on maybe what can we do. Not that you represent every single voice of teenagers and young adults, but I do think that this is a specific voice. And from a mental health perspective, we definitely have heard this voice. And I like how you said something about you are a kinesthetic learner or a visual learner. We have a lot of young people that are the same. And you pointed out something really good. You can be a really good student in the classroom, but virtually, maybe you need to be in the setting. And, you know, I can imagine that if we were to do some statistical research for just 2019 to 2021 and see the decline of grades, not necessarily due to lack of participation from those who already had low grades, but academic students, scholar students. And, you know, this would really be something that I would think that could be studied to see, you know, what was the difference, what could change. And then lastly, and then I'm going to swing it over to Wendy, I think that you brought up something really good when you said that what used to be fun, let's just say going online, that's your pastime, that's your leisure time. And we've discussed this throughout the entire series, that now everything was concentrated for our students. Everything was concentrated for our
there was no way to separate anything out.
Exactly. No way to separate it. And I think, you know, that is definitely a point that I'm hoping that we'll see and that we'll understand in this upcoming school year. Wendy, what are your thoughts? And what other questions do you have for Madison?
Well, I think I do like that discussion about, you and I have talked about this, that distance learning is so much different than for young people to be online on their social media or gaming or all that. You're using different parts of your brain for these activities. So I think personally, that was a miscalculation. That yes, a lot of kids are always on social media, and so distance learning would be a breeze, but Madison did point out that kids learn differently.
Yeah.
And that was a big factor in it. Now, you know, I don't want to beat up the school system because we've never been in a pandemic before. And so systems around the country were just acting as best they could to continue the learning, because that is what they are tasked to do. So, but it's a good conversation, and I'm glad that Madison's being honest and giving our audience a young person's perspective, because as Danielle indicated, we are clinicians and we saw such decline in people's mental health in terms of symptoms of depression and a lot of anxiety over grades, anxiety over what's that going to mean for my future, and then just the big social disconnect. Kids
especially my scholars, especially my scholar students that are in therapy for other reasons outside of academic challenges. my scholar students were experiencing the anxiety. Madison, you also mentioned some of the milestones that maybe you weren't really thinking about before, but prom and walking across the stage and, showing your accomplishments. A lot of my scholar students and even some of my students that were just making by, the whole range, they missed that. And that did cause a sense of sadness or depression or, the recognition. Like, I did have a couple of students that worked really hard and pushed and finally made the grades that they had posted their goal to, and they didn't get to walk across the stage. So yeah, definitely. I think, again, I appreciate your candidness, and, I do appreciate this conversation. Mm-hmm.
So, Matt, is there anything you think that young people, teenagers miss the most?
Just the social interaction. That's really all we really miss. People were so sad about missing prom and doing all these little activities just because they didn't get to see their friends. Not because it was just like, oh, it's my high school, like I want to do this. No, it's my high school with my friends that I've come all the way up from elementary school that I'm not able to share these experiences with. That's basically it.
Definitely. I can even say, as an adult, you go to work every day. There's certain routines that you have. You go to work every day or you go to school every day. It's part of your routine. It's part of your actual functioning, your social functioning, where you get up, you go to school, you see your friends. You may have after school activities. You may have a sport. You may be a part of a club, art club, book club. I don't know what kind of clubs are out there right now, but all of those interactions that make up your day and make up who you are as a social being was cut. And so how do you begin to normalize functioning in a pandemic? Not in my lifetime. I don't think my parents' time, and maybe my grandparents' time when they were very, very young, in maybe the 20s, they maybe experienced something on the latter half. But this is all new. And I'm not sure if, as Wendy said, the school system even had the foresight to know what to do in this instance. But I'm hoping that now, with all of the information, all of the experiences, all of the ups and downs of last school year, they're going to approach this school year with something new, with something innovative, not just for high school, but for college as well. And you said that you're going back. So yeah, you said you're going back and you're going back in person. So I'm excited for you. Be safe, girl, but I'm excited for you.
I will.
I think that's the biggest challenge, not only for middle, high school, elementary, all the way up through, college, graduate school. How do you keep everyone safe? Because they've learned a big lesson that social distancing, distance learning, quarantining, did damage to a lot of kids in a way. And so how do we continue our education safely? And I think that's the priority on everybody's mind as we go forward into this new academic year. Everyone is, I hope, masked up, vaccinated. Danielle, I always support that. Keep everybody safe and keep people moving and connecting. So that's very, very important.
Right. So Madison, before we go, we always try to end with something positive, and we're so happy to have you here today. You're a younger voice, a different perspective. You are right in the midst of it. You're right in the thick of it. And we're talking about school. We're talking about the education system and what happened. So it seems like the pandemic, where we are right now, it seems like it's not going to get any better anytime soon. We do have safety measures that are in place. But from your perspective, for our teens that listen and our young adults that listen, what kind of tips or advice would you give to them? And even for parents, what type of tips or advice, based on your experience that you've even let us know about today, you let us in a little bit, what kind of advice would you give?
For people that are my age, teens, preteens, I say to never stop communicating and always speak up. If you're having trouble, speak up. If you feel like you're just losing control because everything's so overwhelming, speak up. I found that parents this whole time would just assume, go to social media and post and be like, well, my child wants to go in person. Well, my child has this difficulty, when really they're just assuming that their child is having trouble because, everybody's in the house. Child's not motivated, all of that. So I just advise that everybody just communicate as much as they can so nothing is misled.
Love that. I love that. I love that you're really encouraging the dialogue, regardless of how old you are. And I think sometimes too, parents or caregivers or even teachers, because we kind of been there, done that, we might assume that we know what's going to happen or what our kid is thinking or what our mentee is thinking or what our students are thinking. But you all experienced it too from a different perspective. And I think that your voice is important. So I like that you're saying and that you're reiterating, never stop communicating. Never stop asking questions. Do a check-in, process. Sometimes, and I know this too, sometimes I'll hear, oh, I'm fine. I'm okay. You're fine. You're okay. And I think FINE stands for feelings inside not expressed. So Tell me a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about feeling just fine. And sometimes it turns out that it's not fine. So let's talk about it. Let's process. Let's work through it. Wendy, what are your thoughts before we go?
I mean, I love that FINE acronym. I don't think a lot of people in our audience know that. Feelings inside never expressed. So I know with Madison, whenever she says I'm fine, I know that she's not. It's just a quick answer. And sometimes I have to probe a little bit more to make sure I'm not making assumptions and I haven't missed anything as a parent. So, we talked about these tips. And I think communication really is just the road to everything. If you can communicate how you're feeling, a problem, something good, something bad, etc., and keep it open, then you're going to have success. And, as a parent, I learned that she's doing the best she can in these circumstances. This was new to everyone. And so I try to be, really patient and not be on that bandwagon of, your grades have to be da-da-da-da-da. I reminded her about her grades, but I said, I told her always reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to your community, your college community, and get help if you need something, or, talk to an advisor if something isn't working. So again, it all goes back to communication, and I'm so for that. I love that.
Well, Madison, we thank you so much for coming to the show.
Of course.
And I think it was appropriate to have to round it out with someone who's in the system, in the educational system, currently going to school, currently at college. Shout out your college again.
Temple University Owls.
Okay, going to Temple in college, experiencing this. You're about to go back into school for the first time in a long time in person. I think that this was appropriate, Wendy, to send off our series with COVID and the education system. What happened? I'm so glad to have another series complete. Woo!
I know, right? Right. I mean, I'm so excited. Mad had time out of her schedule before she heads back to sit in with us. And I thought also she's a bio major. So, all year long, I've been listening to her about this COVID virus and what it is and what it isn't and everything that people say on TV and all the facts, because that's her major. So very happy that you were able to lend a voice to people your age and younger about all of this. And I hope our audience members, really listen closely. You gave some good tips. And I hope they listen. Coming up, we are going to feature in September and October, we're doing a 2-part series on resources. So we're just going to have various agencies come on our show, talk about the research that are available in the community, because, this is going to be a stressful time. People back in school, teachers back teaching, things that weren't seen this whole past year are going to be seen in person, and it's going to just heighten everybody's anxiety. And so we just want to make sure that people have places that they can call and reach out to in the community. So we look forward to sharing that knowledge with our audience.
Wonderful, wonderful. Madison, again, we thank you so much for coming on the show. We
Thank
hope to come and have you back. You're welcome. A year later, like a year in view, or a year, take a look of what has happened and what things have been accomplished from this point till next year this time. ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you enjoyed the show. My name is Danielle Young with Advanced Behavioral Health, making a difference in mental health with my co-host, Wendy Grier. We're always striving to make a difference in mental health. We will see you next time.